Okay, so we're gonna get started now. So welcome everyone. So we're gonna be talking about breaking the stigma of mental illness in today's presentation. Before we begin, I do want to I want to give you a background of who I am and a background of Association House of Chicago and their mission and some of the services that we do offer. So my name is Aurelia Gordillo. I am a community health education specialist at Association House of Chicago, and Association House of Chicago is a nonprofit organization located in the Humboldt Park area. So the mission of Association House of Chicago is to serve a multicultural community by providing comprehensive, collaborative, and effective programs in English and Spanish. We promote health and wellness and create opportunities for educational and economic advancement. We have a high school, we have behavioral health, child welfare, community health, and then we have workforce development. And I am part of the community health. So for community health, we also offer mental health first aid. So mental health first aid is just like CPR. They help you assist an individual having a heart attack. Mental health first aid helps you assist someone experiencing a mental health or substance use related crisis. In the mental health first aid course, you're going to learn risk factors, warning signs for mental health and substance use concern strategies for how to help someone in both crisis and non-crisis situation and where to turn for help. This webinar is not affiliated with Mental Health First Aid. Also, we do offer the Adult Mental Health First Aid, which is adult assisting adults, and we offer the Youth Mental Health First Aid, which is an adult assisting a youth. So, if you are interested in taking a mental health first aid course, we are going to be offering it virtually very soon, although I cannot give you an exact date. If you are interested, just make sure that you do check out our website, associationhouse.org, or follow us on Facebook at AHCCHWFD for any updates in regards to mental health first aid. So now we're going to be getting started. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what we're going to be talking here today. We're going to start off by talking about the stigma. We're going to talk about why is breaking the stigma of mental health important. Then I'm going to give you the definition of mental illness. Then we're going to go over some of the tips to overcome the stigma of mental illness. And then at the end, I'm going to give you some resources for mental health. So what is stigma? Stigma is when someone views you in a negative way because you have a distinguishing characteristic or personal trait that is taught to be or actually is a disadvantage, a negative stereotype. Unfortunately, negative attitudes and beliefs towards people who have a mental health condition are common. So that stigma can lead to discrimination, such as people saying negative remarks about your mental illness or treatment. It can also be unintentional, such as people avoiding you because a person assumes you are unstable or dangerous due to your mental illness. You may even judge yourself. So, isolation, discrimination, shame, embarrassment can happen because of stigma, and often the biggest challenges people face with mental illness aren't their illnesses at all. It is that stigma or those negative feelings, attitudes, and stereotypes that surround mental health, and that can make getting help scary and leading if you're feeling life difficult. Stigma prevents people from seeking help, it restricts resources from being allocated, and it discourages others from lending their support. Other harmful effects of stigma can include reluctance of seeking help, lack of understanding, having fewer opportunities for work, school, or any social activities. Also, bullying, physical violence, or harassments, and the belief that you'll never succeed at certain challenges or that you cannot improve your situation. So, why is it important to break that stigma? Because mental health, mental illness, is common. 1 in 5 people will experience a mental health condition in their life, and that is around 46.6 million people per year. And then a little bit of information on youth mental health. 1 in 5 children ages 13 through 18 have or will have a serious mental illness. 50% of a lifetime cases of mental illness begin by age 14. Suicide is the third leading cause of death in youth ages 10 through 24. 90% of those who die by suicide have an underlying mental illness. Approximately Approximately 50% of students ages 14 or older with a mental illness drop out of high school. So it is very important that we do also help our youth change the way they look at mental health, because maybe teens and young adults may be struggling, and because of that stigma, it might make it difficult for them to seek any help. So now we're going to be looking at some of the different types of mental illness, different types of stigmas. So we're going to start off with talking about that public stigma. So this happens when the public endorses negative stereotypes and prejudice, resulting in discrimination against people with mental health conditions. For example, saying people with mental illnesses are weak. Then we have that self-stigma, and that happens when a person with mental illness or substance use disorder internalizes public stigma. So they start to have the person that does have that a mental illness starts to believe that maybe they are weak. Then we have perceived stigma. So perceived stigma is the belief that others have negative beliefs about people with mental illness. So it reflects the individual's belief about and attitudes of others, about the attitudes of others. So, for example, someone saying most people believe that depression is a sign of personal weakness. Then we have label avoidance. This is when a person chooses not to seek mental health treatment to avoid being assigned a stigmatizing label. Label avoidance is one of the most harmful forms of stigma. So they do not want to seek help because they do not want to be labeled. So, for example, someone saying a mental health diagnosis means I'll be crazy, so I won't go and get evaluated or seek any treatment. This is one of the most harmful forms, just because if they're not getting any treatment or any diagnosis, they can have in the future they will have poor long-term functioning. Maybe they might start to have strain on relationships, start to isolate themselves from family, friends. There can be a disruption of education and employment. They can have an increase of alcohol and drugs just to self-medicate. They can have low self-esteem and low confidence. Then we have stigma by association. So the stigma by association occurs when the effect of stigma are extended to someone linked to a person with mental health difficulties. This type of stigma is also known as courtesy stigma or associative stigma. So this is where maybe families are being ashamed, or community members, they start to distance themselves from that family. Then we have structural stigma. So this is institutional policies or other societal structures that result in decreased opportunities for people with mental illnesses are considered structural stigma. So policies, rules, procedures of social institutions that restrict the right and opportunities for people with mental illnesses. And finally, we have the health practitioner stigma, and this takes place anytime a health professional allows stereotypes and prejudice about mental illness to negatively affect a patient's care. So, for example, in one of the articles that I used to get information for this topic, there was an example, and it said a cardiac surgeon said that he will not do surgery on a person with schizophrenia because he didn't think that person will be able to do the required follow-up care. Okay, so now we're going to be talking about some of the effects of stigma. So stigma prevents 40% of people with anxiety or depression from seeking help. Stigma seriously affects the well-being of those who experience it. Stigma affects people while they are experiencing problems, while they are in treatment, while they are healing, and even when their mental health problem is a distant memory. Stigma profoundly changes how people feel about themselves and the way others see them. So it is very important to break that stigma because it's people that have mental illnesses can their future can be affected. They can have problems with relationships, employments, education. So it can affect almost all parts of their life. So now I want to ask a question, and that is, what are some words that we hear in our community when it comes to mental illness? So I'll give you a few seconds. You do not have to type it, but just think about it in your mind. Okay, so I do want to show you this picture. I want to start out by talking about the picture on the left. And this was a study done in England. And the participants were 14-year-old students, and there were around 472 participants. And they asked the following question. What sort of words or phrases might you use to describe someone who is experiencing a mental illness? And these are just some of the words that they used. So this study was done in England, so some words might be a little bit different, but as you can see, they use crazy, psycho, confused, scary, violent. Also, here on the right, we do have another picture that I found, and it says, quit being psycho. Oh yeah, yesterday I was feeling really depressed. I swear I'm like retarded. And saying statements like this are going to increase that stigma. Also, I do ask this question in when I do my mental health first aid trainings, and some people also have said things like pray about it. Although religion and praying can be very helpful, that alone might not be helpful. They might need a little bit more than that. Also, I have also heard saying things like keep it in the family. So a lot of people say they want to keep it in the family because they don't want others to judge them. And that can also be that stigma by association that I mentioned earlier. So now I want to give you the definition of a mental disorder or mental illness. And that is a diagnosable illness that affects a person's thinking, emotional state, and behavior. It disrupts the person's ability to work, carry out daily activities, and engage in those satisfying relationships. And now we're going to take this opportunity to look at some myths and facts of mental illness. So here are just some statements that stigmatize mental illness. So nobody I know has a mental illness. People with mental health problems are bad employees. Once you have a mental illness, you can never get better. You're too young to have mental health problems. Mentally ill people are violent. If you're mentally ill, you belong in a mental hospital. And now I'm going to be showing you the facts. Nobody I know has a mental illness. So like I mentioned earlier, 1 in 5 adults in America experience a mental health illness. So it's more common than we think. People with mental health problems are bad employees. So employers report attendance, punctuality, and motivation on par with or greater than other employees. Once you have a mental illness, you can never get better. So 70 to 90% of people who have shown significant reduction of symptoms and improved quality of life with the right treatments. You're too young to have mental health problems. 20% of youth ages 13 through 18 live with mental health conditions. With young people, sometimes it can be hard to look for signs and because young people go through so many changes that it can make it difficult to know the difference between typical behavior and non-typical. Mentally ill people are violent. Only 3 to 5% of people of violent acts are attributed to people with mental illnesses. Actually, people with mental illnesses are more likely to be victims of violent crimes. If you're mentally ill, you belong in a mental hospital. 2 out of 3 people with a mental illness live in their community and lead productive lives. It is possible for people who have mental illnesses to recover and live productive lives. You want to think of a mental illness just like any other physical illness. People who have mental illness can go into remission and recovery just like someone who has a physical illness. So now we're going to go and talk about how to fight that stigma. So you want to start out by addressing the stigma. You want to challenge the stigma that's associated with mental illness, and that is going to take understanding, education, and a closer look at our own attitudes. You want to be aware of your attitudes and behaviors. You want to examine your own judgmental thinking and that's reinforced by upbringing and society. And with this, I say is that you might have to unlearn what you might have learned throughout your life. You also want to be very conscious of language. You want to make sure that you do choose your words carefully because the way that we speak can affect the attitudes of others, and also it can increase that stigma. So here are just some things that we should say and some things that we shouldn't say and why. Okay, so starting off with a person living with or has a diagnosis of mental illness. Do not say mental patient, psycho, mad, because certain language sensationalize mental illness and then it starts to reinforce that stigma. The second one is a person is being treated for or someone with a mental illness. Do not say victim, suffering from, affected with a mental illness. The terminology that suggests a lack of quality of life for people with mental illnesses. And then a person has a diagnosis of or is being treated for. Do not say a person is schizophrenic and anorexic because labeling a person by that's labeling the person by their mental illness. And lastly, the person's behavior was unusual or erratic. Do not say crazed, deranged, mad. Descriptions of behavior that imply existence of mental illnesses or are inaccurate. Okay, and then you want to make sure that you do talk openly about mental health. Educate yourself, pass on facts and positive attitudes, and challenge those myths and stereotypes. So that is why I showed you those myths and the actual facts before I started to show you on how we can break that stigma. You want to make sure that you do educate yourself about mental health, and that is an important part of taking care of yourself, of being supportive of others, and creating that positive change in the community. So at the end, I am going to give you some local resources and some other resources that you can go online, and you can, if you want to go and learn more about a certain mental illness and learn about the risk factors, learn about signs and symptoms, I'm going to give you those websites that you can get information from. And then encourage equality between physical and mental illness. So mental illnesses can be just as impactful as physical illnesses, and then sometimes even mental illnesses can be more disabling than many chronic physical illnesses. You want to make sure that you support people, treat everyone with dignity and respect, and offer support and encouragement. So, one way to offer support is by listening non judgmentally. Some key attitudes are acceptance, being genuine, and having empathy. Some nonverbal skills are attentiveness, comfortable eye contact, open body posture, being seated, sitting next to the person, and maybe do not fidget. You make sure you want to have an open body posture because that's going to show like that you're welcoming, that um, you're there to listen. Because if you do have your arms crossed, maybe it's going to show that you do not have time for them. And then do not fidget or do not check your phone constantly because that's also going to show that you're not paying attention and that you do not have time for them. Do not express any negative judgments that you might have. Be in the right frame of mind to be able to express concern without being judgmental. Set aside your own beliefs and reactions. Provide a safe provide the person with a safe space because a negative reaction will pull the person away and they will not want to have a conversation with you. Also, maybe have questions that are open ended. For example, saying, well, why don't you tell me how you are feeling rather than I can see you are feeling very low. So you can start off with some of those questions and that can lead to that conversation. Also, you want to give the person reassurance and information. So remember treating the person with respect, with dignity. Understand that symptoms are an expression of distress or part of an illness. You want to have the realistic expectations, offer consistent emotional support and understanding, give the person hope for recovery. You want to provide practical help and you want to offer credible information. Make sure that you are offering credible information because then if you don't, the person might not trust you again. And it is okay to say, hey, I do not know, I do not know the information, but maybe we can contact this hotline or we can check out this website, right? So you want to also make sure you are honest with them. Also, maybe joining support groups. If it is for like a teen, a young adult, maybe getting help at school, contacting school counselors, social workers. So this picture that you can see, I got it from the NAMI website, and they offer peer support groups, family and friend support groups, and they have classes for mental health. So if you want to know more information, you're more than welcome to check out their website or call them. You want to also encourage the person to get treatment. So here are some of the types of professional help. So we have doctors, psychiatrists, social workers, counselors, and then other mental health professionals. Then there is certified peer specialist, and that is someone who has lived experience. Then we have the types of professional help. So there's talk therapies, medication, and then other professional supports. And I do also want to mention that recovery is not going to be the same for everyone and it's going to look different. Then we have encouraging self-help and other support strategies. So this can be added to someone's road to recovery. So you have exercise, relaxation, meditation, peer support groups, self-help books based on cognitive behavioral therapy, and these books have research behind them, family, friends, and faith, and then other social networks. Also, what you can do is you can sit down with them and brainstorm on things that can help them or the ideas that they have that could be helpful. What's not supportive is telling them to snap out of it. So, like I mentioned earlier, mental illness can be just as impactful as a physical illness. So you wouldn't say that you wouldn't say to someone that has a physical illness to snap out of it because they just can't, right? Do not act sarcastic. Do not adopt an over-involved or overprotective attitude. Do not blame the person for their symptoms. Do not nag the person to do what he or she would normally do. Do not dismiss the person's feelings or try to cure the person. Try not to make assumptions about what is wrong or jump in too quickly with your own diagnosis and solutions because, again, you are not a mental health professional. If that is your job and that is what you do, then you can. But if you're not, do not try to diagnose or cure anybody, but rather um, give them that support and listen to them. Okay, so here are some resources. If you do have an emergency, you want to make sure you do call 911. So I know that there is a lot going on, and maybe sometimes calling the police is not the best option, but there are some other options that you can do. What you can do when calling 911, you want to maybe request for an ambulance, just an ambulance, or you want to request for a CIT officer. And a CIT officer is a crisis intervention team. So these officers are trained to interact, intervene, and de-escalate situations that are related to mental illness. Then we have the SAMHSA Distress Helpline as well as the text line. We have the crisis text line. So there is the crisis text line. We have the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. I did put the text lines just in case for someone that might not feel comfortable talking over the phone. Maybe texting would be easier. Then I have the Autism Response Team. And then here at the bottom, I have some websites that you can go on and learn a little bit about some of the mental illnesses and other resources as well. And here are some local resources located on the west side of North and northwest side of Chicago. So we have Association House of Chicago, we have Community Health, Chicago's Children's Center for Behavioral Health, the Lotus Center, as well as Youth Service Project Casa Central, Old Irving Park Community Clinic, and La Casa Norte. And then here are some of the references that I use. If you want to know more or read some of the articles that I found, you're more than welcome to check them out. And then I found this picture at the NAMI website, and it says, "We have the courage to believe that healing is possible." So thank you again so much. Have a great day.